When I opened that envelope and saw my son's handwriting for the first time in 25 years, I did not cry. I did not smile either. I just stood there in my quiet living room, holding a piece of paper that felt heavier than it should have been. The letter was short. Too short for all those years. It said they wanted me to come for Christmas. It said they heard I had done well for myself. And right there, in that one line, I knew. This was not about love. This was not about missing me. This was about money. But I folded that letter carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and made a decision. I would go. Not because I hoped for reconciliation. Not because I thought my son had suddenly remembered he had a mother. I would go because I needed to know the truth. I needed to look him in the eyes and understand what kind of man he had become. And maybe, just maybe, I needed to show him what kind of woman I had become too. My name is Dorothy Gibson. I am 72 years old. And this is the story of how I was erased from my son's life for a quarter of a century, and how I walked back into it on my own terms. This is the story of silence and survival. This is the story of a mother who learned that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is not fight back, but simply stand firm. This is my story. And it starts long before that letter arrived. It starts with a young woman who thought love was enough. It starts with mistakes and heartbreak and years of struggle that taught me who I really was. Let me take you back. Let me show you where it all began. I was not always strong. I want you to know that. There was a time when I was so broken I did not think I would survive another day. That time was most of my life, if I am being honest. I became a mother young. Too young, some would say. I was 22 when I had Wesley. I had just married his father, a man named Gerald who had a smile that made me believe everything would be okay. Gerald worked construction. He was handsome and charming, and he told me I was the only woman he would ever love. I believed him. I believed every word. We lived in a small apartment on the south side of town. The walls were thin and the heater barely worked in winter, but I did not care. I was happy. I was going to be a mother. I decorated the tiny nursery with second-hand furniture and blankets I sewed myself. I sang to my belly every night. I dreamed about what kind of mother I would be. I promised myself I would be patient and kind and present. I promised myself my child would never feel alone. Wesley was born on a cold morning in March. He was small and pink and perfect. When they placed him in my arms, I felt something I had never felt before. It was not just love. It was purpose. It was the feeling that nothing else in the world mattered, except keeping this tiny human safe and happy. I looked at Gerald standing beside me and I thought, we are a family now. We are going to be okay. But we were not okay. Gerald started staying out late. He said it was work. He said he was picking up extra shifts so we could save money. But there was never any extra money. The bills kept piling up. The rent was late. The electricity got shut off twice. And Gerald kept disappearing. I would wake up in the middle of the night and reach across the bed and find it empty. I would sit there in the dark with Wesley crying in the next room. And I would wonder where my husband was. I would wonder if he was ever coming back. When Wesley was 3 years old, Gerald left for good. I woke up one Saturday morning and he was gone. His clothes were gone. His wallet was gone. There was no note. No explanation. Just an empty closet and a silence that felt like it would crush me. I called his work. They said he had quit 2 weeks earlier. I called his brother. He said he had not heard from him. I sat on the floor of our apartment with Wesley playing with his toy cars beside me, and I realized I was alone. Completely alone. I did not have family to fall back on. My parents had died in a car accident when I was 25. I had one sister, Rebecca, but we had not spoken in years. We had fought over something stupid, something I cannot even remember now, and we both let pride keep us apart. So it was just me and Wesley. A single mother with no degree, no savings, and no idea how I was going to survive. But I had to survive. Because Wesley needed me. So I did what I had to do. I got a job at the post office. It was not glamorous work. I sorted mail for 8 hours a day, standing on concrete floors that made my feet ache. I came home exhausted every night, but I still had to cook dinner and give Wesley a bath and read him stories until he fell asleep. Then I would sit at the kitchen table and try to figure out how to pay the bills. I would move money around like a puzzle, trying to make it all fit. Sometimes it did. Sometimes it did not. When Wesley started school, I picked up a second job. I worked evenings at a diner downtown, serving coffee and eggs to people who barely looked at me. I became invisible. Just another tired woman in a stained apron, refilling cups and clearing plates. I would smile and say thank you and take their tips even when they were rude because I needed every dollar. I needed to keep the lights on. I needed to keep food in the fridge. I needed to make sure Wesley had what he needed. I worked weekends too, cleaning houses for families who had everything I did not. I scrubbed their toilets and mopped their floors and folded their laundry, and I tried not to feel bitter. I tried not to compare their lives to mine. But it was hard. It was hard to see their big kitchens and their clean cars and their children who had new shoes and toys and books. It was hard to know that I was working 3 jobs and still barely making it, while they had so much they did not even notice. But I kept going. I kept showing up. Because that is what mothers do. We keep going even when we are falling apart. We keep going because someone is counting on us. And Wesley was counting on me. I made sure he had breakfast every morning. I made sure he did his homework. I made sure he knew I loved him. Even when I was too tired to say it out loud. I was always there. Even when I was exhausted. Even when I felt like I was drowning. I was there. But I think Wesley grew up seeing me as someone who struggled. I think he saw the worn-out clothes and the late rent notices and the way I would count change before going to the grocery store. I think he learned to see me as someone who was always behind, always barely making it. And I think somewhere along the way he became ashamed of that. He never said it. But I felt it. When he got older, he stopped asking me to come to his school events. He said it was fine that I did not need to take time off work. But I knew. I knew he did not want the other kids to see his mother in her old coat and her tired face. He started spending more time at his friends' houses. Houses where the mothers wore nice clothes and drove nice cars and did not look like they were carrying the weight of the world. I told myself it was normal. I told myself he was just growing up. But it hurt. It always hurt. When Wesley graduated high school, I cried. I was so proud of him. He had worked hard. He had gotten good grades. He had gotten into a decent college with some financial aid. And I helped him as much as I could. I took on extra shifts. I skipped meals so I could send him money for books. I made it work because that is what I had always done. I made it work. He graduated college. He got a job in marketing. He met a woman named Lillian. She came from a family with money. Her father owned a car dealership. Her mother was on the board of some charity. They lived in a big house with a pool. And I could tell from the first time I met Lillian that I was not what she expected. She was polite. She smiled. She shook my hand. But her eyes moved over my apartment, taking in the old furniture and the chipped paint, and I saw something flicker in her expression. Disappointment, maybe. Or pity. I was not sure which was worse. Wesley started pulling away. It was small at first. He stopped calling as often. He canceled plans. He said he was busy with work. He said he and Lillian were building their life together. And I understood. I told myself it was normal for children to grow up and move on. I told myself I should be happy he was doing well. But I missed him. I missed my son. I missed the little boy who used to climb into my lap and tell me about his day. I missed the teenager who used to eat cereal at midnight and talk to me about his dreams. I missed feeling like I mattered to him. And then came the day that changed everything. The day that started the silence. Wesley called me one evening. I was making soup. Something cheap. Beans and carrots and a bit of sausage. I was stirring the pot when the phone rang, and I felt my heart lift because I had not heard from him in weeks. He asked if he could come over. I said yes, of course. I was so happy to hear from him. I cleaned the apartment. I made tea. I waited. He showed up with Lillian. They sat at my tiny kitchen table, and I served them tea in mismatched mugs. I asked about work. I asked about their apartment. I tried to make conversation. And then Wesley cleared his throat and said, "Mom, we need to talk to you about something." I nodded. I thought maybe they were going to tell me they were engaged. Or maybe Lillian was pregnant. I was ready to be happy for them. But that is not what he said. He said, "We are trying to buy a house." I smiled. I said, "That is wonderful, sweetheart." And then he said, "We were hoping you could help us with the down payment." The words hung in the air. I looked at him. I looked at Lillian. And I felt my chest tighten. I said. Wesley, I do not have that kind of money. He leaned forward. He said, Mom, you have been working for years. You must have something saved. I shook my head. I said, I have a little saved, but it is for emergencies. I am still working. I still have bills. Lillian shifted in her seat. She looked uncomfortable. Wesley looked frustrated. He said, We really need this, Mom. This is our chance to get started. To build something. I said, I understand, but I cannot give you what I do not have. He said, You mean you will not? I felt my throat tighten. I said, That is not fair. He stood up. He said, You know what is not fair? Growing up watching you struggle. Watching you work yourself to the bone and still have nothing. I do not want to live like that. I want more. His words felt like a slap. I wanted to say I worked myself to the bone for you. I wanted to say everything I did was so you could have more. But I did not. I just sat there, feeling small and ashamed and angry all at once. Lillian touched his arm. She said, Wesley, maybe we should go. He looked at me one more time. He said, I thought you would want to help me. And then they left. I sat at that table for a long time after they were gone. I stared at the cold tea. I listened to the silence. And I waited for the phone to ring. I waited for him to call and apologize. I waited for him to say he was sorry, that he had been upset, that he did not mean it. But he did not call. Not that night. Not the next day. Not the next week. Days turned into months. Months turned into years. And I never heard from him again. 25 years. 25 years of silence. 25 years of wondering if I had made the wrong choice. 25 years of wondering if my son thought about me at all. And in those years I changed. I had to. Because waiting for someone who is never coming back will destroy you. So I stopped waiting. And I started building. The first year after Wesley stopped calling was the hardest year of my life. Harder even than when Gerald left. Because when Gerald left, I still had Wesley. I still had a reason to keep going. But when Wesley stopped calling, I felt like I had lost my purpose. I felt like everything I had worked for had been for nothing. I would come home from work and sit in my empty apartment and wonder what I had done wrong. I would replay that conversation over and over in my mind, trying to figure out where I had failed him. I thought about calling him. I picked up the phone so many times. I would dial half the number and then stop. Because I did not know what to say. I did not know how to fix something that felt so broken. And part of me, a small stubborn part, thought he should call me. He was the one who had asked for money. He was the one who had walked away. Why should I be the one to apologize? But as the months went by, I realized something. I realized that I could not spend the rest of my life waiting for my son to come back. I could not spend every day wondering if today would be the day he remembered me. Because that kind of waiting is not living. That is just surviving. And I was tired of surviving. I wanted to live. I wanted to build something for myself. Something that could not be taken away. So I made a decision. I decided I was going to do something I had never done before. I was going to invest in myself. Not in a selfish way. Just in a practical way. I was 52 years old. I had spent 30 years working jobs that paid just enough to get by. I had spent 30 years putting someone else first. And I had nothing to show for it. No house. No savings. No retirement plan. I was one emergency away from losing everything. And I realized that if I did not change something, I was going to spend the rest of my life struggling. One afternoon, I was at the community center dropping off some donations. There was a bulletin board by the door, covered in flyers. Most of them were for yoga classes or bake sales. But one caught my eye. It was about night classes at the community college. Basic bookkeeping and accounting. I stood there staring at that flyer for a long time. I thought I am too old for this. I thought, what is the point? I thought I barely made it through high school. How am I supposed to learn accounting? But something in me, some small stubborn spark said, why not? What do you have to lose? So I took the flyer home. I read it over and over. The classes were twice a week in the evenings. They cost $200 for the whole course. It was not a lot, but it was more than I usually spent on myself. I thought about it for a week. And then I signed up. I was terrified on the first day. I walked into that classroom and saw people half my age. Young people with laptops and notebooks and confidence. I felt out of place. I felt old and slow and stupid. But the teacher was kind. Her name was Mrs. Halloway. She was probably in her 60s, with gray hair and reading glasses on a chain. She smiled at me when I walked in and said, "Welcome. You are exactly where you need to be." Those words meant more to me than she could have known. I sat in the back. I listened. I took notes. And I did not understand half of what she was saying. Debits and credits and balance sheets. It was like learning a foreign language. But I kept showing up. I did the homework. I asked questions, even when I felt embarrassed. And slowly things started to make sense. Mrs. Halloway was patient with me. She would stay after class sometimes and go over things again. She never made me feel stupid. She would say, "Dorothy, you are doing better than you think. Just keep going." And I did. I studied on weekends. I practiced problems at my kitchen table. I read the textbook over and over until the words made sense. And by the end of the course I understood. I understood how money worked. I understood how businesses tracked income and expenses. I understood how people built wealth not by getting lucky but by being smart and consistent. I finished the course. I got my certificate. It was just a piece of paper, but it felt like more than that. It felt like proof that I could do something. That I was not too old. That I was not too late. I framed it and hung it on my wall. And then I started looking for a better job. I found one at a small property management company. They needed someone to handle the books for a few storage units they owned. It was not glamorous, but it paid more than the post office. And it taught me even more. I started to see how people made money from property, how they bought low, rented it out, and made steady income. I started to understand why some people had so much while others like me had so little. It was not just luck. It was knowledge. It was understanding how money worked. I started reading books about real estate. I went to the library and checked out everything I could find. I read about rental properties and cash flow and return on investment. I read about people who had started with nothing and built empires. And I thought maybe I could do that. Maybe on a much smaller scale I could build something too. It took me 3 more years of saving. 3 years of living in the same small apartment. 3 years of eating simple meals and not buying anything I did not absolutely need. I worked overtime whenever I could. I set aside every dollar I could spare. And when I had enough, I bought my first property. It was a tiny storage facility on the edge of town. Just 10 units. The place was run down. The paint was peeling. The locks were rusted. The owner was an older man who wanted to retire, and he was desperate to sell. I offered him cash. It was everything I had saved. He accepted. I was terrified. I thought, what have I done? What if no one rents these units? What if I just threw away 3 years of savings on a piece of junk? But I did not have time to be scared. I had work to do. I spent my weekends fixing the place up. I cleaned out the units. I replaced the locks. I painted the doors. I put up a sign on the road. And I placed an ad in the local paper. People started calling. Not a lot at first. But enough. A man who needed to store his old furniture. A woman who was moving and needed space for her boxes. A small business that needed somewhere to keep inventory. They paid me rent. And I used that rent to fix up the units even more. I added better lighting. I paved part of the driveway. I made it a place people wanted to use. At the end of the first year, I had made back my initial investment. At the end of the second year, I had steady income. It was not a lot, but it was more than I had ever had before. And it was mine. I owned it. No one could take it away from me. I was 58 years old when I bought my second property. Another small storage facility. This one had 20 units. I used the income from the first property to help with the down payment. I fixed it up the same way. And it worked. People rented. The income was steady. I was not rich. But I was not struggling anymore. I bought a third property when I was 62. And a fourth when I was 65. I learned how to manage tenants. I learned how to handle repairs. I learned how to run a small business. I did most of the work myself to save money. I painted. I fixed locks. I cleaned. I did not mind. Felt good to work with my hands. Felt good to build something. By the time I was 70, I owned 6 small properties, storage units and a couple of small rental houses. The income was enough that I could have quit my job at the property management company. But I did not. I liked working. I liked having a routine. I liked feeling useful. And I did not need people to know I had money. I did not need to show off. I just needed to know I was going to be okay. I still lived in my small apartment. I still drove my old car. I still shopped for groceries with coupons. People who saw me probably thought I was just another old woman living on a fixed income. And I let them think that. Because I did not need their validation. I did not need anyone to know my worth. I knew it. And that was enough. But there was still a part of me that wondered about Wesley. Every birthday, every holiday, every Mother's Day, I would sit in my apartment and wonder where he was. I would wonder if he was happy, if he had children, if he ever thought about me. I would wonder if he knew I was still here, still alive, still waiting. Even though I told myself I had stopped, I thought about hiring someone to find him. I thought about showing up at his door. But I never did. Because if he wanted to find me, he could have. My name was in the phone book. My address had not changed. If he had wanted to reach out, he would have. And I had to accept that he did not want to. I had to accept that I had lost my son. Not to death, but to silence. And that, in some ways, was worse. So I kept living. I kept working. I volunteered at the food bank on weekends. I read books. I took walks in the park. I had a quiet life. A simple life. I was not unhappy, but I was not whole either. There was always a piece missing. A piece shaped like a little boy who used to hold my hand and call me Mama. And then, on a cold December afternoon, 25 years after the silence began, I checked my mailbox and found a letter. The handwriting was his. And everything changed. I stood in the hallway of my apartment building, holding that envelope. My hands were shaking. I could feel my heart beating in my chest. For 25 years I had imagined this moment. I had imagined getting a letter or a phone call. I had imagined what it would say. I had imagined 1,000 different versions of my son coming back into my life. But now that it was real, now that I was holding his handwriting in my hands, I did not know what to feel. I walked back to my apartment. I set the envelope on the kitchen table. I made myself a cup of tea. I sat down. And I stared at it. Part of me did not want to open it. Because once I opened it I would know. And I was not sure I was ready to know. But I could not leave it sitting there forever. So I took a breath, picked up the envelope and carefully tore it open. The letter was short. Just a few sentences on plain white paper. It said, "Dear Mom, I hope this letter finds you well. Lillian and I would like to invite you to spend Christmas with us this year. We know it has been a long time. We have heard that you have done well for yourself, and we thought it would be nice to reconnect. Our address is below. Please let us know if you can come. Wesley." I read it 3 times, 4 times. I read every word carefully, looking for something between the lines, looking for an apology, looking for an explanation, looking for any sign that he missed me. But there was nothing, just a polite invitation. Like I was a distant relative he had not seen in a while. Like 25 years of silence was just a long time, not a lifetime. And then there was that line. "We have heard that you have done well for yourself." I read it again. And I felt something cold settle in my chest. He did not say he missed me. He did not say he was sorry. He said he had heard I had done well. How did he hear that? Who told him? And why did it matter? I sat there for a long time holding that letter. I thought about all the years I had waited for this. All the years I had wondered if he would ever reach out. And now he had. But it did not feel the way I thought it would. It did not feel like love. Felt like something else. Felt like need. I could have thrown the letter away. I could have ignored it. I could have protected myself from whatever was coming. But I did not. Because I needed to know. I needed to understand. I needed to see my son one more time, even if it hurt. Even if it broke my heart all over again. So I wrote back. I kept it short that I said, "Wesley, I will be there on Christmas Day. Mom." I did not say anything else. I did not ask questions. I did not tell him how much his silence had hurt. I just said I would come. And then I mailed it. And I started preparing. But I did not prepare the way most people would. I did not go shopping for gifts. I did not plan what to wear. I prepared by making phone calls. I prepared by gathering information. Because that line in his letter, "We have heard that you have done well for yourself," told me everything I needed to know. This was not about reconciliation. This was about money. I called a friend of mine who worked at the county clerk's office. I asked her to look up Wesley's address. She did. And then I asked her to see if there were any properties registered to him. There was one. A commercial property. A restaurant. I asked her if there were any liens or mortgages on it. She checked. There was a mortgage. A big one. And it was in default. I called the bank that held the mortgage. I told them I was interested in purchasing distressed loans. They said they had several. I asked them about the one on Wesley's restaurant. They said it was about to go into foreclosure. They were looking to sell it. I asked how much. They told me. And I bought it. It took 2 weeks to finalize everything. I paid cash. And just like that, I owned my son's debt. I owned the mortgage to his restaurant. He did not know it yet. But he would. I made sure of that. On Christmas morning, I woke up early. I dressed simply. A nice blouse. A cardigan. Clean slacks. Nothing fancy. I looked like someone's quiet, aging mother. Which is exactly what I was. I packed the folder of documents into my bag. And I drove to the address Wesley had written in his letter. It was a house in a neighborhood I did not recognize. It was nicer than where I lived, but not extravagant. The kind of neighborhood where people worked hard to keep up appearances. The house had a wreath on the door and lights along the roof. It looked like Christmas. It looked like a family home. But I knew better. I knew that behind that door was desperation. I parked on the street. I took a deep breath. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. I looked old. Older than I felt. My hair was more gray than brown now. My face had lines I did not remember getting. But my eyes were steady. I was not the same woman who had sat at that kitchen table 25 years ago, begging her son to understand. I was someone different now. Someone stronger. I walked to the front door and knocked. Wesley answered. He was older, of course. His hair was graying at the temples. His face was heavier. He had lines around his eyes. But he still looked like my son. And for just a moment I forgot everything. For just a moment I wanted to hug him. But he did not move toward me. He just smiled. A polite, distant smile. And he said, "Mom, you made it." I said, "Hello, Wesley." He stepped aside and let me in. The house smelled like roasted chicken and cinnamon. There were decorations everywhere. A tree in the corner with lights and ornaments. Stockings hanging on the mantel. It looked perfect. But it felt empty. Lillian came out from the kitchen. She was thinner than I remembered. Her face looked tired. She smiled the same polite smile Wesley had. She said, "Dorothy, it is so good to see you." I nodded. I said, "Thank you for inviting me." We sat down in the living room. There was small talk. The kind that strangers make. They asked how I was. I said I was fine. They told me about their lives. Wesley said he was still in marketing. Lillian said she was helping with the restaurant. That was the first mention of it. I did not react. I just listened. Wesley said they had opened the restaurant 5 years ago. He said it had been his dream to own his own business. He said it was a nice place. Italian food. Good reviews. But things had been tough lately. He said the economy was hard. That people were not eating out as much. He said they were struggling to keep up with the bills. I nodded. I said, "That must be difficult." Lillian looked at Wesley. Wesley looked at her. And I knew. This was it. This was the moment they had been building toward. Wesley cleared his throat. He said, "Mom, we wanted to talk to you about something." I folded my hands in my lap. I said, "Go ahead." He hesitated. He looked uncomfortable. He said, "We are in a tough spot right now. The restaurant, it is not doing as well as we hoped. We have some debts. We are behind on the mortgage. And we heard from someone in town that you have been doing really well. That you own some properties." I did not say anything. I just waited. He continued. He said, "We were hoping maybe you could help us out. Just a loan. We will pay you back, of course. We just need a little bit to get through this rough patch. We would not ask if we were not desperate." Lillian nodded. She said, "We really would not ask if we had any other choice. But we are about to lose everything. and we thought maybe family could help family. Family. The word hung in the air. I looked at them. I looked at my son, who had not spoken to me in 25 years. I looked at his wife, who had never really wanted me in their life. And I felt calm. Completely calm. Because I had prepared for this. I had known exactly what they wanted. I said, "How much do you need?" Wesley shifted in his seat. He said, $50,000. Lillian added quickly, "We will pay you back. With interest. We just need time." I nodded slowly. I said, "And you think I should just give that to you?" Wesley said, "Not give. Loan. We will pay you back." I said, "Like you have paid me back for all those years of silence?" The room went quiet. You could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Wesley looked at the floor. Lillian's face went pale. I said, "I did not come here for an apology. I do not need one anymore. But I am not going to pretend this is about family." I reached into my bag. I pulled out the folder. I placed it on the coffee table in front of them. I said, "I already own the mortgage to your restaurant." Wesley's head snapped up. He said, "What?" I said, 2 months ago your bank sold your loan. I bought it." Lillian's hand started shaking. She said, You bought our mortgage?" I said, "Yes." Wesley stared at me. He said, "Why would you do that?" I said, "Because I knew this invitation was not about seeing me. I knew you needed money, so I looked into it, and I made sure I was the one you owed." Wesley stood up. He said, "You did this to punish us." I stayed seated. I said, "No. I did this to protect myself. I did this so you could not use me and walk away again." I opened the folder. I slid the papers across the table. The mortgage documents. The payment schedule. Everything. I said, "You have 2 choices. I can foreclose. You will lose the restaurant. You will lose everything. Or you can work with me. You will pay back every cent you owe under my terms, and you will do it with respect and accountability." Lillian was crying now. She said, "This is not fair." I looked at her. I said, "What is not fair is being abandoned for 25 years because I could not afford to buy you a house. What is not fair is being erased from my son's life, and then invited back only because you need money. That is not fair." I stood up. I said, "I am not doing this to punish you. I am doing this because I will not be used. Not again. You have 1 week to decide. If you want to keep the restaurant, you will meet my terms. If not, I will take it. Either way, I am done being invisible." And I walked out. I did not look back. I got in my car. I drove home. And I sat in my apartment alone, feeling something I had not felt in years. I felt powerful. Wesley called me 3 days later. His voice was quiet, almost broken. He said, "We will do it your way." I said, "Good. I will come to the restaurant tomorrow. We will go over everything." He said, "Okay." And then after a long pause he said, "Mom." I waited. He said, "I am sorry. I did not know what to say." I wanted to believe him. But words are easy. Actions are what matter. So I just said, "We will see." The next day I drove to the restaurant. It was in a strip mall on the edge of town. Small. The sign said Angelo's Kitchen. There were only a few cars in the parking lot. I walked in. It was a nice place. Cozy. Red tablecloths. Candles on the tables. Pictures of Italy on the walls. It had potential. But it also had problems. I could see them immediately. Wesley and Lillian were waiting for me at a table in the back. They looked exhausted. I sat down. I did not waste time. I said, "Show me the books." They brought out folders. Financial statements. Receipts. Bills. I went through everything carefully. And I saw the problem immediately. They were spending too much on things that did not matter. Expensive ingredients that most people could not tell the difference on. Fancy menus that cost too much to print. Decorations that were nice but unnecessary. They were trying to be a high-end restaurant, but they were in a strip mall. They were trying to appeal to customers who were not coming. I closed the folder. I said, "This is what we are going to do. You are going to cut all unnecessary expenses. You are going to simplify the menu. You are going to focus on good food at fair prices. You are going to stop trying to be something you are not. Wesley nodded. Lillian looked like she wanted to argue, but she did not. I said, you will both work here every day. No more excuses. No more delegating everything to your staff. You will show up. You will manage. You will prove to me that you can run this business responsibly. I will check the books every week. And every dollar you make above operating costs and a modest salary for yourselves will go toward paying down this debt. Lillian finally spoke. Her voice was shaky. She said, that does not leave us much to live on. I looked at her. I said, no, it does not. But that is what happens when you borrow more than you can afford to pay back. That is what happens when you make poor decisions. You live with the consequences. Wesley put his hand on Lillian's arm. He said, we understand. I said, good. Because if you miss a payment, if you try to hide money, if you do anything dishonest, I will foreclose immediately. No second chances. Are we clear? They both nodded. I said, then we start tomorrow. And we did. I showed up at the restaurant the next morning at 8. Wesley and Lillian were already there. I could tell they had not slept much. I did not feel sorry for them. Not yet. I sat down with them and we went through the menu. I crossed out half the items. I said, these are too complicated. Too expensive. You need simple dishes that people love. Pasta. Pizza. Salad. Good bread. That is what people want. Lillian said, but those are so basic. I said, basic sells. Fancy does not here. We looked at the vendors. I found cheaper suppliers for most of their ingredients. Not lower quality, just less expensive because they were not paying for brand names. I renegotiated the lease on their equipment. I cut their marketing budget and told them to focus on word of mouth and social media, which cost nothing. Within 2 weeks, the restaurant looked different. The menu was shorter. The prices were lower. But the food was still good. Better, even because the kitchen could focus on doing a few things really well instead of trying to do everything. And something else happened too. Customers started coming back. People who had tried the restaurant once and thought it was too expensive gave it another chance. People who lived in the neighborhood and wanted a simple, good meal started showing up regularly. I watched Wesley work. I watched him greet customers and take orders and bus tables when they were short-staffed. I watched him in the kitchen, helping the cook during the dinner rush. And I saw something I had not seen in a long time. I saw him working hard. Not because he wanted to impress anyone, but because he had to. Because his survival depended on it. Lillian was harder to read. She was polite to me but distant. I could tell she resented me. I could tell she thought I was being cruel. But I did not care. I was not there to be liked. I was there to make sure they learned something. I was there to make sure they understood that money does not come easy, and that family is not a bank you can withdraw from whenever you need something. After a month, I sat down with them to review the numbers. They had made their first payment. It was small, but it was on time. I nodded. I said, good. Keep it up. Wesley looked at me. He said, Mom, can I ask you something? I said, go ahead. He said, why are you doing this? Why did not you just foreclose and be done with us? I thought about that for a moment. I said, because foreclosing would have been easy. It would have been clean. But it would not have taught you anything. You would have just blamed me and moved on and made the same mistake somewhere else. This way you have to face what you did. You have to work for it. And maybe, just maybe, you will become better people because of it. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I really am sorry, Mom. For everything. For walking away. For not calling. For only reaching out when I needed something. I was wrong. I looked at him. I wanted to believe him. And maybe part of me did. But I also knew that sorry was just a word. What mattered was what came next. I said, then prove it. Show me through your actions, not your words. He nodded. He said, I will. And slowly, over the next several months, things began to change. Not just with the restaurant, but between us. Wesley started calling me. Not every day, but regularly. He would update me on the business. He would ask for advice. And sometimes he would just call to talk. About nothing important. About the weather. About something funny that happened at the restaurant. And those calls meant more to me than he probably knew. One Sunday afternoon, about 4 months after Christmas, Wesley called and asked if I would come over for dinner. Not at the restaurant. At his house. He said, "There are some people I want you to meet." I said, "Who?" He said, "Your grandchildren." I had not known I had grandchildren. He had never mentioned them. Not in the letter. Not in any of our conversations. I felt something twist in my chest. I said, "How old are they?" He said, "Jacob is 15. Emma is 13. 15 and 13. I had missed their entire lives. I had missed birthdays and holidays and first days of school. I had missed everything. But I said, I would love to meet them. And I meant it. Because even though I had missed so much, maybe it was not too late to know them now. I went to dinner that Sunday. I brought flowers for Lillian and a pie I had baked that morning. Wesley answered the door. He smiled. And this time it looked real. He said, "Come in, Mom." The house felt different than it had at Christmas. It felt less tense. Less like a performance. Lillian greeted me. She took the flowers and actually smiled. She said, "Thank you, Dorothy. These are beautiful." And then 2 teenagers came down the stairs. A tall boy with dark hair and his father's eyes. A girl with long brown hair and a shy smile. Wesley said, "Mom, this is Jacob and Emma. Kids, this is your grandmother." Jacob shook my hand. He was polite but reserved. Emma gave me a small wave. They did not know me. And I did not know them. But we sat down at the dinner table together and we talked. I asked them about school. About their hobbies. Jacob liked basketball. Emma liked to draw. They asked me questions too. Where I lived. What I did. If I had any pets. It was awkward at first. But as the evening went on, it got easier. Emma showed me some of her drawings. They were good. Really good. She drew people and buildings and landscapes with incredible detail. I told her she was talented. She blushed and said thank you. Jacob told me about his basketball team. They were having a good season. He asked if I would come to one of his games sometime. I said I would love to. When it was time to leave, Wesley walked me to my car. He said, "Thank you for coming." I said, "Thank you for inviting me." He hesitated, then said, "I know I can never make up for the time we lost. I know I can never give you back those years. But I want to try. I want you to be part of our lives. If you will let me." I looked at my son, my boy who was not a boy anymore, who had made mistakes and hurt me and was now trying to make it right. And I said, "I would like that." He hugged me, and I let him. I had not hugged my son in 25 years, and it felt strange and familiar all at once. Over the next year, things continued to improve. The restaurant became profitable. Wesley and Lillian made their payments on time every time. They worked hard. They stopped spending money they did not have. They learned to live within their means. And slowly they started to build something real. I started having dinner with them once a month. Sometimes at their house. Sometimes at the restaurant. I went to Jacob's basketball games. I went to Emma's art show at school. I was not trying to make up for lost time. You cannot do that. The past is gone. But I was building something new. Something honest. Wesley and I talked about the years of silence one evening. We were sitting in the empty restaurant after closing. He said, "Why did not you ever reach out? In all those years, why did not you call?" I said, "Because you were the one who walked away. You were the one who decided I was not worth your time. And I was not going to beg you to love me." He nodded. He said, "I was ashamed. After that night, after I asked you for money and you said no, I felt embarrassed. I felt like I had exposed something. And it was easier to just cut you off than to face it. And then time passed and it got harder and harder to reach out. I told myself you probably did not want to hear from me anyway. I told myself you were better off without me." I said, "I was never better off without you. You were my son. You were my whole world. But I learned to live without you because I had to." He looked at me with tears in his eyes. He said, "I am so sorry, Mom. I wasted so much time. I was so stupid." I said, "Yes, you were. But you are doing better now. And that is what matters." He asked, "Do you forgive me?" I thought about that. Forgiveness is complicated. It is not something you just decide to do one day. It is something you build piece by piece through actions and time. I said, "I am working on it. Ask me again in a few years." He smiled through his tears. He said, "Fair enough." 2 years after that first Christmas, Wesley and Lillian made their final payment on the restaurant. They had paid back every cent they owed with interest. I signed the papers transferring the mortgage back to them. The restaurant was theirs free and clear. We celebrated with a family dinner. Jacob and Emma were there. They were older now. Jacob was getting ready for college. Emma was thinking about art school. Wesley raised his glass. He said, "To Mom, for teaching us what real strength looks like. For not giving up on us, even when we gave up on you." Everyone clinked glasses. And I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. I felt like I had a family again. But it was not the same family I had lost. This was something new. Something built on honesty and boundaries and respect. It was not perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness. There were still scars that had not fully healed. But it was real. And that was more than I had ever hoped for. I am 74 years old now. It has been 2 years since that Christmas when Wesley invited me back into his life. 2 years since I walked into his house and set my boundaries and refused to be used. 2 years since I stopped being invisible. People ask me sometimes if I regret how I handled things. They ask if I was too hard on Wesley and Lillian, if I should have just given them the money and been grateful they reached out at all. And I tell them no. I do not regret it. Because giving them money would not have fixed anything. It would have just repeated the same pattern. They would have taken what they needed and disappeared again. And I would have been left with nothing but the knowledge that my love could be bought and discarded. Instead, I taught them something valuable. I taught them that actions have consequences. I taught them that family is not about money. It is about showing up. It is about respect. It is about being there, not just when you need something but all the time. And they learned that lesson. It took time. It was not easy. But they learned it. I still live in my small apartment. I still live simply. I do not need a big house or fancy things. I have what I need. I have my properties which continue to provide steady income. I have my work which keeps me busy and gives me purpose. And I have my family. Not the family I thought I would have, but the family I built from broken pieces. I see Wesley and his family regularly now. We have Sunday dinners. I go to Jacob's basketball games. Even though he is in college now and plays for his university team. I go to Emma's art exhibitions. She is incredibly talented, and I am so proud of her. We have traditions now. We celebrate birthdays and holidays together. We are building memories. But I never forget the 25 years of silence. I never forget what it felt like to be erased, to be invisible, to wonder if your own child thinks about you at all. Those years shaped me. They taught me that I could survive anything. They taught me that I did not need anyone else to validate my worth. I could validate it myself. I learned that strength is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is not about fighting or yelling or making demands. Strength is quiet. Strength is showing up every day, even when you do not want to. Strength is working when you are exhausted. Strength is saving when it hurts. Strength is saying no when you need to, even if it costs you something. Strength is protecting yourself even when no one else will. I learned that you cannot wait for other people to see your value. You have to build it yourself. You have to invest in yourself. You have to believe that you are worth the effort, even when no one else seems to think so. And once you build that foundation, no one can take it away from you. No one can make you feel small again. I learned that family is complicated. Blood does not automatically make someone family. Respect does. Showing up does. Caring does. And if someone in your family does not respect you, if they only show up when they need something, then they are not really family. They are just people you happen to be related to, and you do not owe them anything just because you share DNA. I learned that forgiveness is not something you owe anyone. It is not a gift you give freely just because someone asks for it. Forgiveness is something you build over time, through consistent actions and changed behavior. Wesley is earning my forgiveness. He is earning it every day by showing up, by being present, by treating me with respect. And maybe one day, I will be able to say I have fully forgiven him. But I am not there yet. And that is okay. Because healing takes time. I learned that it is never too late to start over. I was 52 years old when I decided to change my life. 52. Most people think that is too old. Most people think that by the time you reach 50, your life is set. You are who you are. You have what you have. But that is not true. I went back to school. I learned new skills. I built a business. I created financial security for myself. And I did it all after the age that most people think you should just settle and accept your lot in life. I learned that you do not need to tell everyone your story for it to matter. I lived quietly. I built my life in the shadows. Most people who saw me had no idea what I had accomplished. They saw an old woman in a cardigan, driving an old car, living in a small apartment. They had no idea I owned multiple properties. They had no idea I had built something from nothing. And I did not need them to know. I did not need their validation. I knew what I had done. I knew what I was capable of. And that was enough. I learned that money is a tool, not a solution. Having money did not fix my relationship with Wesley. It did not erase the 25 years of pain. It did not make me feel less alone. What it did was give me options. It gave me power. It gave me the ability to set terms instead of accepting whatever crumbs people were willing to give me. It gave me the ability to protect myself. And that was valuable. But it was not the same as love. It was not the same as family. It was just a tool I could use to build the life I wanted. I learned that you can love someone and still set boundaries. I love Wesley. I have always loved him. Even during the 25 years of silence, I loved him. But loving him did not mean I had to accept being treated poorly. Loving him did not mean I had to give him whatever he asked for. Loving him did not mean I had to sacrifice my own well-being for his comfort. I could love him and still say no. I could love him and still demand respect. And that was one of the hardest lessons I ever learned. That I think about the woman I was 25 years ago. The woman who sat at her kitchen table and watched her son walk out the door. The woman who felt small and ashamed and powerless. And I barely recognize her. She was so tired, so beaten down by life, so convinced that her worth was tied to what she could give other people. She thought that if she just worked hard enough, if she just sacrificed enough, people would see her value. But they did not. They just took what she gave and asked for more. I am not that woman anymore. I am someone different. Someone stronger. Someone who knows her worth and will not settle for less than she deserves. Someone who has learned that the only person responsible for your happiness is you. Someone who has learned that you cannot wait for other people to save you. You have to save yourself. And I did save myself. I pulled myself up from nothing. I educated myself. I worked hard. I made smart decisions. I built something real and lasting. And I did it all alone. No one helped me. No one cheered me on. No one told me I could do it. I just did it because I had to. Because the alternative was to give up. And I was not ready to give up. Now, when I sit in my quiet apartment at the end of the day, I do not feel lonely anymore. I feel peaceful. I feel content. I have built a good life. Not a perfect life. Not the life I imagined when I was young. But a good life. A life I am proud of. A life that is mine. I still have hard days. I still have moments when I think about all the time I lost with Wesley. All the moments I missed. All the memories I do not have. And it hurts. It will always hurt. You do not get over that kind of loss. You just learn to live with it. You learn to accept that some things cannot be fixed, only endured. But I also have good days. Days when Jacob calls me just to tell me about his day. Days when Emma shows me her latest drawing. Days when Wesley stops by with coffee and we sit and talk about nothing important. Days when I feel like maybe, just maybe, I have built something worth having. I volunteer at the food bank every Saturday morning. I help sort donations and pack boxes for families in need. I see people there who remind me of who I used to be. Tired single mothers. Elderly people living on fixed incomes. People who are working as hard as they can and still not getting ahead. And I help them. I do not judge them. I do not lecture them. I just give them what they need and treat them with dignity. Because I remember what it feels like to be invisible. And I never want anyone to feel that way if I can help it. That I have friends now. Not many, but a few good ones. Other women my age who understand what it is like to build a life from nothing. We have coffee once a week. We talk about our lives. We laugh. We support each other. And it is nice. It is nice to have people who see you. Who value you. Who show up. I think about the future sometimes. I am 74. I do not have forever. and I want to make sure that what I have built will last. I have been working with a lawyer to set up my estate. I am leaving my properties to Wesley and his children, not because I think they deserve it, but because I want to give them the kind of security I never had. I want to give them options. I want to give them a foundation they can build on. But I am also making sure there are conditions. They cannot sell the properties for at least 10 years. They have to manage them responsibly. They have to continue the work I started. I am not just handing them money. I am handing them a legacy. And I am making sure they understand the value of what they are receiving. I wrote a letter to go with my will. A letter to Wesley and Jacob and Emma. In it, I tell them my story. The whole story. Not the version they know, but the complete truth. The years of struggle. The loneliness. The pain of being abandoned. The strength I found in the silence. The life I built from nothing. I want them to understand what I went through. I want them to understand that wealth is not just about money. It is about perseverance. It is about discipline. It is about believing in yourself when no one else does. I tell them in the letter that I forgive Wesley. Because by the time they read that letter, I will be gone. And I do not want them to carry guilt. I want them to carry lessons. I tell them in the letter that I forgive Wesley. Because by the time they read that letter, I will be gone. And I do not want them to carry guilt. I want them to carry lessons. I want them to understand that mistakes can be corrected. That relationships can be rebuilt. That it is never too late to do the right thing. But I also want them to understand that actions have consequences. That the choices you make matter. That how you treat people matters. I tell them that I love them. All of them. Even through the years of silence, even through the pain, I love them. And I hope that they will use what I have given them to build good lives. Lives filled with purpose and kindness and integrity. Lives that honor the sacrifices I made. When I think about my life, I do not think about what I lost. I think about what I gained. I gained independence. I gained strength. I gained self-respect. I gained the knowledge that I could survive anything. And those things are worth more than any relationship. Because those things cannot be taken away. Those things are mine forever. I am not a perfect person. I have made mistakes. I have been stubborn and proud and sometimes too hard. But I have also been strong and resilient and capable. I have survived things that should have broken me. And I have built a life that matters. Not because it is big or impressive, but because it is mine. Because I created it with my own 2 hands. If I could go back and change things, I do not know if I would. Because all of those hard years made me who I am. All of that pain taught me lessons I needed to learn. If Wesley had never walked away, I might never have found my strength. I might never have discovered what I was capable of. I might have spent my whole life being small and invisible and dependent. And that would have been worse than the loneliness. So in a strange way, I am grateful. Grateful for the silence. Grateful for the struggle. Grateful for the pain. Because it forced me to become someone I am proud of. It forced me to save myself. And that is the greatest gift I ever received. I hope my story helps someone. I hope that somewhere there is another woman sitting in her small apartment, wondering if she will ever be more than she is right now. Wondering if it is too late to change. Wondering if she has the strength to start over. And I hope she reads my story and realizes that she does. That it is not too late. That strength is not something you are born with. It is something you build. One day at a time. One decision at a time. One small act of courage at a time. You do not need anyone's permission to build a better life. You do not need anyone's approval. You do not need anyone to believe in you. You just need to believe in yourself. You just need to take the first step. And then the next one. And then the next one. And before you know it, you will look back and realize you have come further than you ever thought possible. That is what I did. I took the first step when I signed up for that bookkeeping class. I took the next step when I bought that first storage facility. I took the next step when I refused to give Wesley money he had not earned. I took the next step when I bought his mortgage. I took the next step when I walked into his house on Christmas and set my boundaries. And I kept taking steps. One after another. Until I had built something real. And now at 74 I can look back at my life and say I did it. I survived. I thrived. I built something lasting. And no one can take that away from me. Not Wesley. Not Lillian. Not anyone. It is mine. And it will be my legacy. So that is my story. That is how a mother who was forgotten became a woman who could not be ignored. Not because I demanded attention. Not because I made a scene. But because I stood firm. Because I knew my worth. Because I refused to be invisible anymore. And sometimes that is the loudest thing you can do. Sometimes quiet strength is the most powerful force in the world. I am Dorothy Gibson. I am 74 years old. I am a mother. I am a grandmother. I am a business owner. I am a survivor. And I am enough. I have always been enough. It just took me 52 years to realize it. And if you are reading this, if you are struggling, if you feel invisible, if you feel like you have nothing left to give, I want you to know something. You are enough too. You have always been enough. You just need to start believing it. You just need to start building. Start today. Start right now. Take one small step toward the life you want. And then take another. And another. And do not stop. Do not let anyone tell you it is too late. Do not let anyone tell you that you are not capable. Do not let anyone make you feel small. Because you are stronger than you think. You are more capable than you know. And you deserve a life that honors your worth. A life that celebrates your strength. A life that is yours and yours alone. So build it. Fight for it. Protect it. And never ever apologize for taking up space in this world. That is the lesson I learned. That is what 25 years of silence taught me. And that is what I want to pass on to anyone who needs to hear it. You are enough. You have always been enough. Now go build the life that proves it.